Well, it's good to be with you guys this morning as we continue our series on wrestling with Scripture. Earlier in the year, many of you submitted ideas of tough passages that we should look at together. So the pastors and some staff have been walking through these passages together this summer. And we have a doozy today. Today we are going to look at a passage that many people see as the cornerstone of the Christian faith. And when others read it and see it, they see confirmation that God is exclusive and intolerant. Today, we are going to look at Jesus' own claim of being the way, the truth, and the life. And along the way, we're going to be asking the question, are Christians exclusive? So let's do it. Let's dive in. Let's explore this passage together this morning. And as we do, I think we'll see that these words were not meant originally as the basis of an apologetics course or to prove other faiths wrong. These words are words of comfort for Jesus' disciples who are in crisis. And being comforted, the disciples are propelled into the world to be people of comfort in and for the world. Let's read this passage together. It's from John 14, 1-6, and the words are going to be on the screen. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be. And you know the way to where I'm going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. These words of Jesus to his disciples come as part of an extended conversation that Jesus is having with his disciples just before he is arrested or betrayed and arrested. Now, Jesus has been telling his disciples for quite a while that he would be arrested and that he would suffer and that he would die. But for the most part, this has completely gone over his disciples' head. They simply could not reconcile, on the one hand, Jesus as the Messiah, the King of the coming King, with the other hand, that Jesus would be arrested and be killed. These two things simply did not compute for the disciples. But now, Jesus' betrayal and arrest are imminent. And the disciples start realizing Jesus is leaving. This man that we've given up our entire lives for the last 3 years is leaving us. They've left their families and their careers, their family responsibilities. They've lost any shred of credibility they may have had with the ruling religious authority and with the mainstream Jewish community. They've consorted with sinners, and they've broken religious laws. And so to speak, they are on the Roman watch list as seditionists. Not only that, Jesus tells them that it is Judas, their own brother, who is going to betray Jesus. And Peter, their kind of lead disciple, is going to utterly deny Jesus. Can you put yourselves in their shoes for a moment? Can you imagine what it must have felt like to be those disciples there? They must have felt like the rug was completely pulled out from underneath them. They must have felt abandoned by this same man who they had given everything up for. So Jesus, recognizing this distress in their disciples, shifts gears a little from warning them about what is to come, and he shares the words that we just read together. And it starts off with, don't let your hearts be troubled. These are words of comfort. This whole passage is words of comfort. It starts with words of comfort, and it is words of comfort. And Jesus continues and encourages them, believe in God, believe also in me. It's like he's saying, guys, no matter how bad the next few days get, trust me. Keep on trusting me. Believe me. And in order to help the disciples trust him over these next few days, which will likely be some of the worst days of their entire life, he gives them a word picture of hope. Jesus is leaving them, but he's not abandoning them. He's leaving so that he can go to the Father's house and prepare a room for his disciples. The language of Father's house or God's house probably would have made the disciples think of the temple. And the temple at that time was the place on earth where God's presence dwelt with his people. So for Jesus to say that he's going to his Father's house, it's like he's saying, I am going into God's presence ahead of you, and I am preparing a place for you. And in this presence, there is so much space and so much room that you do not have to worry that there is room for you. And their place in God's presence is even more certain because Jesus promises to come back one day and take his disciples with him to God's presence. So Jesus here has given his disciples a future hope to carry them through these next few miserable days. But not only that, Jesus also says, and besides, you already know the way to where I'm going. This hope is not only for the future, but it's also for now, because the disciples know the way right now to God's presence. Jesus is leaving to prepare a place. He's going to come back and take his disciples there. And right now, the disciples already know the way. Now, obviously, Jesus is a little cloudy on the details here. And that's probably because the details of how he comes back and all of that just aren't what's important here. But nevertheless, it goes right over the disciples' head again. So Thomas, who honestly is probably thinking the very same thing that all of the other disciples are thinking, but is the only one bold enough to ask it. He says, Jesus, we don't actually know where you're going. How on earth could we know the way? Don't we need more Thomases in our church who are willing to ask the embarrassing questions on our behalf? I think we do. We need more Thomases. So Jesus, in response to Thomas's question, says those famous words, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Friends, Jesus really is as clear as he sounds. It really is that straightforward. These words are comforting for his distraught disciples because they already know Jesus. And if they already know Jesus, then they already know the way to God's presence. The way to God is a person, no more and no less. And Jesus adds with the last clause even more clarity. He says, no one comes to the Father except through me. These two must have been received as words of comfort to his disciples because remember, his disciples went all in on Jesus. They put all of their chips on him. If there was another way to God, then all of what they had gone through and all of what they will go through, including their own deaths, their martyrdoms, would be meaningless. These are words of comfort. I wonder, do you guys need to hear words of comfort today? Are you going through something and you just need to hear from God that he loves you, that he cares for you, and that he's comforting you? I encourage you guys today, throughout the day, take these concerns to God and lean more and more into Jesus, who is the way to God's comforting presence. These are words of comfort for his disciples. My wife Lauren and I had our first child, Madison, about a year ago in June. And over the last year, I've had the great privilege of experiencing firsthand the joys of being a new dad. But perhaps one of the best new experiences is seeing how much Madison loves to be with mommy. When Lauren comes home from work, Madison stands up on her wobbly legs and runs as fast as she can right into Lauren's arms. And when Madison falls down and hurts herself, or when she is just so exhausted at the end of the day, all she wants to do is be with mommy, in mom's presence. She knows that her mom wants the best for her, that she cares for her, that she loves her, and that she will comfort her the only way a mom knows how. What a beautiful picture this is of God's loving presence that he offers to humanity. But Jesus knows that his words of comfort will not protect his disciples from all that will come. They will still experience pain and fear and suffering and even be martyred for what they believe. These words, though, do provide comfort in that no matter what the disciples experience, they will always be in God's comforting presence. Because they know Jesus, the way, and nothing can take that from them. So despite these being words of comfort, many people, even many Christians, feel like these words aren't necessary for today. As I was preparing for this, I came across a letter by Dale Bruner, who is a biblical scholar, and he wrote this letter to the editors of his local paper after they covered a worship service between Christians and Hindus. And the Christians in the service were apologizing to the Hindus for their past attempts of converting them. So Bruner writes, "Dear editors, the Saturday notice of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles celebration with Hindus of the fact that both faiths, Christianity and Hinduism, revere great figures who embody the divine light, who teach the divine truth, does us the service of showing why much mainline Protestant Christianity is dying. The earliest church refused to join Jesus with the Roman pantheon of great figures who embody divine light, and as a result, she was mowed down in the Colosseums of the Mediterranean world for what was felt to be her arrogant intolerance. But the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church, and in 300 years, the Roman Empire was converted. When the church has had the guts to hold to the one God of Israel and to this one God's one great self-revelation, the Messiah Jesus, and when she speaks and acts as graciously and as courageously as her Lord and his prophets in mission, she deeply helps not only still cast-bound Hinduism, but everyone else she reaches. Look at the major hospitals all over the world, the leprosaria, the schools for women in the Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist worlds, and the passion for social justice that Jesus elicits wherever he is faithfully heard and followed. The bishop of our diocese does not need to apologize for attempts to convert people of other religions. He needs to apologize for the loss of the faith and courage to seek such conversions. Let 1,000 faiths, religious and secular, speak their deep convictions in the public square, and each with its legitimate passion to convert. Let us respectfully listen to what each has to say, and let us see who prevails. The truth can handle itself." F. Dale Bruner, adult Sunday school teacher, First Presbyterian Church of Hollywood. He does note that his letter was never published. Bruner does a great job of helping us to start answering the question of the day: are Christians exclusive? From the very beginning, Christians have been, and we continue to be, exclusive in that we hold exclusively to Jesus as the way to God. Christians held on to this exclusive claim even in the face of extreme persecution because they knew that Jesus is the only way to the presence of God, and that presence is worth everything. It is even worth facing the worst the world can throw at them. Aside from pointing to the necessity of Jesus being the only way, Bruner's letter points to something else that we shouldn't overlook. From the earliest days, Christians wanted to share the comfort that they've received with the rest of the world. The comfort they experience in Jesus propelled them to be people of comfort in and for the world. And having received this comfort, Christians through the millennia have made it their mission to show other people the way to Jesus so that they could be comforted. They know how life-changing, how world-changing this comfort from Jesus can be, and they were willing to endure even the worst of persecution so that other people could share in Christ's comfort. This is what it means to be people of comfort in the world. To point people to Jesus, the one and only way, so that they may have comfort also. Being people of comfort means pointing people to Jesus so that they may also receive comfort. This does make me wonder, though, if we as Christians in America in the 21st century are living effectively as people of comfort. Some of you may have heard the phrase, the rise of the nuns. This is a phrase related to the increase of people who opt not to affiliate with any religion. So when researchers give them a survey and say, check the box next to the religion you affiliate with, they check the box that says none. So researchers call them nuns. Most of them still believe in God. They aren't opposed to the idea of God. They simply choose not to affiliate with a religion. Nuns made up 3% of the American population in the 1940s. In 2012, they made up nearly 20% of the American population. And even more revealing, nuns make up nearly a third of people under the age of 30. So this trend is not slowing down, it's not stopping, it's continuing. More and more people are not religious, and fewer people are experiencing God's comforting presence through Jesus Christ. This changing religious landscape, it truly affects how we ought to live as people of comfort in and for the world. During the 90s and early 2000s, a group of InterVarsity campus ministers were facing this shifting religious landscape firsthand. The modes and the means of evangelism that they had used to share the gospel with other people simply stopped working, and they stopped working almost overnight. And so they realized that if they were going to be people of comfort in the world for people who most need it, the skeptics, the nuns, the people far from God, then they were going to have to change the way they lived as Christians and how they ministered. So they started experimenting, and lo and behold, it started to work. When nearly all of the campus ministries in the country were drowning in these new cultural changes, this group of InterVarsity ministers were actually seeing more people come to know Jesus. They also started asking these new Christians why and how it was that they became Christians. Through their interviews with over 2,000 students, they realized that almost all of them came to Jesus through similar stages of growth in faith. Now, obviously, the details for every person was different, but the stages were all similar. Each person moved toward Jesus by crossing 5 different thresholds of faith. This organic pattern of growth was repeated over and over and over again throughout decades of ministry. And as you can see, here are the 5 thresholds. Now, all of these thresholds are equally important for someone to move from not trusting Jesus to trusting Jesus. But today we're going to focus on that first one of trust because, well, it's the first one that someone has to cross in order to move toward Jesus. And the trust there is not trusting God, it's not trusting Jesus. That comes way further down the road, maybe years down their spiritual journey. The trust there is to trust a Christian. It seems to say then that the default relationship that Christians have with non-Christians is one of distrust. In order for a Christian to move towards Jesus, they have to first get over their distrust of us. Maybe you've experienced this distrust before. I wonder, has being a Christian ever come up in conversation around the water cooler or in the neighborhood, and you have felt that urge to hide the fact that you are a Christian? Because you realize it's not going to be received well. Guys, to my shame, I have even been tempted to use this to my benefit. So, have any of you been on a plane before? You sit down next to your seatmate, and you realize very quickly that he is a talker. I know that all I have to do is get out in the conversation that I'm a pastor, and he will not talk to me the rest of the flight. The truth, though, is that we are so distrusted that we feel the need to hide our faith from others. And we are so distrusted that perfectly nice people stop talking to us. Why are we so distrusted? In 2007, a Barna research group asked this same question, and so they went and asked non-Christians, those far from the church, nuns, if you will, what they thought about Christians. And this was their response. Christians are anti-homosexual, judgmental, hypocritical, too involved in politics, out of touch with reality, not accepting of other faiths. Remember, you guys, the people who responded to this survey are not opposed to God. They are okay with God existing, but they don't want to be part of a God whose followers are like this. For the people who answered this survey, the verse, John 14:6, Jesus being the only way, truth, and life, does not feel like comfort to them. It feels like confirmation that Jesus is just as judgmental and intolerant and insensitive as his Christians. Is there any wonder why people stop talking to us when they learn that we are Christians? If we are so distrusted, then how can we be people of comfort who point people to Jesus the only way if the first threshold they must cross is to trust us? Remember, Christians have always been received with skepticism and distrust. Bruner even pointed to that in his letter as the reason why Christians were martyred in the early church. This also means, though, that we have an example to learn from. We can learn from the early church how they were people of comfort in a world full of people who distrusted them. I want to read a section from the book that lays out those 5 thresholds to you. The authors write, "The good news is that we are not the first generation to face a context whose default is distrust. The Apostle Paul faced an inherently skeptical audience as he traveled from city to city in the Roman Empire. Those who espoused a Hellenistic or Greek worldview were not impressed with his declaration of the resurrection. They did not begin with a posture of respect. In fact, they looked down on this poser, mocking him as a babbler. Paul was not offended or intimidated by their insults. Instead, he found a way to press on and declare the good news. Let us learn, like Paul, to not only survive, but thrive in our current context of distrust. Let us learn to be like Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. God decided to incarnate himself, to come right alongside people. The Word, that's Jesus, didn't have to become flesh and pitch a tent right in our neighborhood, but he did. This is the incarnational way of God, his chosen way to bring people to himself. And it points the way for us, his children, to get along in this world as well. We aren't to preach at people from on high, but to come alongside, to shake hands and befriend, to build trust. Paul and the early church thrived as people of comfort in a world full of people who distrusted them, because they followed Jesus, who didn't stay far off, but came right alongside people in the world. Paul and the others built meaningful, genuine friendships with people who were very unlike them. People who worshiped other gods, people who ate different food, people who spoke different languages, people with very different sexual ethics, people who spoke different languages, and people who distrusted them deeply. So what does it look like for us to be people of comfort in the world today? It starts with being a friend. And guys, this is good news for MDPC because we're good at this. We are a welcoming and a friendly and a loving church. We can become even more effective people of comfort in the world by simply doubling down on what we are already good at and applying it outside of the church in our everyday lives. On the golf course, at work, in the yoga studio, at the bar, around our own dinner tables. So as we wrap up today, the best words of any sermon, I know. Let's go back to our question of the day. Are Christians exclusive? The answer is a resounding, irrefutable, unequivocal yes and no. We hold to Jesus as the only way to the Father as tightly as we possibly can. And the comfort we receive from that promise propels us to be people of comfort, coming alongside the very people who distrust us with extended hands of friendship.